In today's episode, we discuss Cedar Point's record-breaking wing coaster that saved the park from a 1990 disaster. Welcome to Airtime Traveler. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Roller Coaster History Podcast. You are listening to Airtime Traveler. My name is Nathan Grace, and I am joined by my wife and lovely co-host.
Hey, I'm Haley Grace.
And thank you for tuning in to the season premiere, or the premiere of Season 2.
Woo! Very enthusiastic.
Yes. Sound the alarms of the fireworks and all the confetti. And
Okay, now we're too enthusiastic.
You can never be too enthusiastic. That's not true. You can never be too enthusiastic.
I was going to say.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Season 2. It's exciting. So yeah. It's been a few months since we've done an episode, and it's good to be back.
Absolutely.
Back in the swing of things. So,
yeah, for sure.
If this is your first time listening to the podcast, if you haven't listened to Airtime Traveler before, essentially every episode we take a roller coaster and we dive into the history of that roller coaster. I'm a coaster enthusiast and have been for a long time, and my wife Haley is a member of the GP, or the general public. So I'm here to do the research and share the story, and she's here to make things more interesting and try to keep me from being too boring.
Yeah.
She does a good job of that. So.
Unless I'm boring myself.
Well, as long as you're not bored, I think you should be should be okay.
All right. Stay entertained. Got it.
Yep. Well, that's my job, I suppose.
Okay.
If you haven't yet, be sure to go follow us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to go do that now, because what you can do is the pictures and videos that I'll be showing Haley as we go throughout the episode, you can actually go on social media and you can kind of follow along as we're going through the episode. So our handle is just at Airtime Traveler, again on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow us here on Spotify or wherever you might be listening. That'll help you stay alerted whenever we release new episodes. And also be sure to give us a 5-star review if you haven't done so already. That helps other people find the podcast in the future and really helps us out. And so I know some of you have already done that, and we really appreciate it. So I think that's pretty much it. I guess just to kind of give an intro to Season 2, for those of you that listened in Season 1, I know we did a lot of Cedar Fair roller coasters. And mostly that's because every episode that we do, minus the Halloween special and the season finale, we try to do a roller coaster that I have been on. Some of them Haley has not been on, but all the coasters we've talked about have been ones that I have been on.
Right.
And so we did a lot of Cedar Fair parks last year. That was kind of our big trips for the year. And so that's kind of why Season 1 was a lot of Cedar Fair. This year we'll be hitting up some new parks. We'll be going to Dollywood, Kentucky Kingdom, Holiday World, and what am I missing? Potentially Lagoon.
Yeah.
So between those four, we should get a little bit more variety in Season 2 moving forward. So with that being said, let's talk about a Cedar Fair roller coaster.
Fine by me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Yeah, this is what I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and we just ran out of time in Season 1. So we're going to be talking about today, the coaster we're going to be talking about is GateKeeper at Cedar Point. So I think both you and I really enjoyed GateKeeper. I wouldn't say, I think it was kind of middle of the road as far as the Cedar Point roller coasters were concerned for both of us.
Right.
If you haven't yet, you can go and listen to our Cedar Point trip report earlier this week. You can hear more of our thoughts about GateKeeper and the other roller coasters at Cedar Point. But I think for most parks, GateKeeper would be a top 3 coaster in the park. But because it's Cedar Point, it kind of ends up being middle of the road, considering,
there's so many coasters to choose from.
Exactly. So opened in 2013. It's a B&M wing coaster. 4,164 feet long at 170 feet tall, with a top speed of 67 miles an hour and 6 inversions. So
it's a lot of inversions.
Yeah, Haley, I would say 5 or 6 inversions is kind of pushing your limit as far as
envelope. Is that the... what's the term? Pushing the seal of the envelope or something like that.
You get the idea. So I tried to get her on Fahrenheit at Hershey Park and Steel Curtain at Kennywood, and
nope.
she's not having it. So
nope.
But I did get her on GateKeeper. So in the CoasterBot rankings, which if you're not familiar, we talk a lot about CoasterBot here on the podcast. They are a group that does a lot of things in the industry, but one of their most popular projects that they do is every year you can go to CoasterBot's website and you can rank all the coasters that you've been on, and they will compile that into a giant Excel document with like the rankings of all the roller coasters in the world. So we like to use the CoasterBot rankings to kind of just see how coasters are compared by the enthusiasts that participate in the CoasterBot rankings. So
right. Sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't.
It's true. So as we'll see in just a few minutes, we'll talk about you'll see in a few minutes we do disagree about something with GateKeeper, but
yeah.
So out of the 4 B&M wing coasters in the country, it ranks second out of the 4. So Thunderbird ranks at 57, GateKeeper is at 88. X-Flight at Six Flags Great America is 140, and Wild Eagle at Dollywood ranks at 151. So this is the first B&M wing coaster we've both been on. I guess technically we've been on a wing coaster because Skyrush is technically a wing coaster, but it's not really. Not quite the same in my opinion. So, but as we mentioned, Dollywood and Holiday World are 2 of our trips this year, so that'll be 2 new wing coasters to try. So that'll be exciting.
That will be exciting.
As far as how it ranks among other coasters at Cedar Point, it ranks at number 6 at the park, which I think is pretty much where we would put it. The difference is it ranks below Magnum and Raptor,
right,
and ahead of Valraven and Gemini, which I think both of us would rank Valraven ahead of GateKeeper.
We really liked Valraven.
And you didn't ride Magnum for good reason, but I would certainly put Magnum below GateKeeper. So
yeah.
this is why it's kind of interesting to look CoasterBots, just to see like the majority of enthusiasts feel totally different than how you may feel, which is kind of interesting to me. But
right, no, I really liked Valraven.
Yeah, Valraven's really good.
It was a lot.
If you want to hear our hot takes on Magnum and Valraven,
and especially
go listen to that trip report.
To Valraven.
Oh yeah, Haley has a hilarious story about Valraven, so go listen to her.
I'm not going to spoil it because that means you have to go.
Yeah, you have to go listen to that trip report. That's where you'll get the story. Quick review of the name of the coaster. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's a really good name for those of you who don't know. GateKeeper is at the front of the park, and it goes up and over the main entrance to the park, which is where it gets its name from.
There's these really pretty like gate features too that the coaster.
Yeah, it's like 2 towers that the coaster goes through. They call them keyholes, and it does like an inversion over the front of the park.
It's going through gate. Basically.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's very well done. So, and I think the logo looks really nice too. I thought Cedar Point does a good job with the logos on their coasters. Like they put some effort into it for sure. So
the graphic artists, they do a good job.
Yeah, they look really good. Review the paint scheme. I think the paint scheme is really nice. I think it looks really good at the front of the park, and just kind of with the overall aesthetic of being right there on the beach. I think it matches with the light blues and the white.
It's very striking to look at when you first walk into the park.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely, you can't miss it clearly when you're walking into the park. It's just boom right there at the front.
Yeah.
You literally go underneath it to get into the park. So I also think the trains look really nice, like the kind of the brushed gold look that they have, and I think it contrasts really well against the blue track. So
I just have to take notes. Look at the faces in some of these.
It's hilarious to look at pictures of roller coasters and just to see.
Look at the lady in the front. Like, that's hilarious.
She's terrified. Is she holding her ears?
It looks like it.
She looks like she's holding her ears.
Maybe her earrings? Strange. Like she doesn't want her earrings falling out?
Maybe. That might be what she's doing.
Take out your earrings, ladies.
Well, it's so funny because you get people like this that he's just...
He has no reaction.
He looks bored. So funny, the difference.
That kid has no shoes on.
That is true. That kid does have no shoes on. Very strange. Here's the park's description of the ride. Talk about GateKeeper. Thrills start at the gate. Talk about first impressions. That's why we put a coaster that breaks 7 world records at the very front of the park.
What is this voice?
This monologue voice. Giving a taste of what's to be conquered.
Rabbits.
Riders will take flight on the wings of a powerful golden griffin as it guards the entrance, dive bombing and threading its way through impossibly narrow obstacles. I think that's a new thing. I think that's just, every time I read the park's description, I'll bring out monologue voice.
Oh, dear. Okay, keep going.
I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's a lot here. It talks about the remodeled entrance plaza. And then at the end it says, it won't take long to figure out why GateKeeper is inspired by the power of flight. Okay.
You could do monologue voice.
Oh, it won't take long to figure out why GateKeeper is inspired by the power of flight.
Oh my gosh.
All right, everybody's favorite customer reviews. This is the best.
Do monologue voice.
I am not doing it. There's too many reviews. Monologue voice is reserved for the perks description.
Oh, fine.
Here we got 1 star.
But my job was to make you less boring.
I think these customer reviews are going to make me less boring. 1 star. Terrible. They knew rain was coming and delayed the ride to add a train. Then closed for rain after 15 minutes of testing. Awful ride management. Okay, sure.
It's 3 years ago.
Yeah.
They're under new management now.
1 star. Love the coaster. Hate the long waits while rich people with Fast Pass ride as much 4 times before you get on once. This person sounds like they have more of a problem with people buying Fast Passes than the actual ride, but...
I don't know. If people want to buy a Fast Pass, then let them buy a Fast Pass. I mean, we buy Fast Passes because it's like, if we go and only have 1 day to ride stuff, like we buy Fast Passes too.
Yeah.
So it's like, not everybody is rich that buys them.
Yeah. Well, like... I don't know. It's all about what time of year you go to. Mm-hmm. Like, we'll get into that in one of these other reviews. 1 star, blacked out. Okay. 2 stars, good ride but short. X-Flight at Six Flags Great America is a much better wing coaster. Has great curb appeal but not thrilling or long. Cedar Point has lost their roller coaster touch lately, and it's a shame. Steel Vengeance exception. Okay. Hopefully Cedar Point does better in the future. Whoa.
Maybe just don't go back.
Well, and the thing that's weird about this is it talks about good ride but short. And then talks about how great X-Flight is at Six Flags Great America. But I was like, well, but here's the thing. X-Flight, I was like, hold on. There's no way X-Flight is longer than GateKeeper. And sure enough, X-Flight is 3,000 feet with 5 inversions. GateKeeper, 4,100 feet with 6 inversions. So, like, if you're going to have the argument that a ride's too short, but it's better than the ride that's even shorter, like, that just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, very confusing. I have a theory.
Okay.
I think this person works for Six Flags. I think they're an imposter. So? I don't know. Imposter. Here's another 2 stars. Lines are 1 hour 30 wait time always. So, again, this is like you got to go at the right time. Like if you go on a Saturday in the summer.
Their next trip. There you go.
If you go on a Saturday in the summer, certainly it's going to be a long line.
Any park you go to, please don't go on a weekend if you
can help it.
Yeah.
Or like if you care about getting on all the rides, like that's the busiest time for sure. So. Right. Here's another 2 star. This guy just says it was too much. Too much what? I don't understand. It was too much.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I want to know more. I want to know more.
Why is it too much?
3 stars. I prefer a smooth ride. It had a lot of jerky turns and felt claustrophobic around turns. Not my thing. Okay. I mean, I get a little bit of that. The jerky turns. I think we definitely both said it was a little bumpy. So, yeah.
And I think, like, you'll hear us talk about this during our trip report, but, like, your dad mentioned, like, how it felt bouncy and, like, because it wasn't supported
right, because of the wings.
Yeah. So, like, it is going to be... General public will tell you it's
a little bumpy.
A little bit bumpy.
Yeah.
So. Here we go.
3 stars. I assume it's a good coaster. I assume it's a good coaster. I personally just don't ride coasters.
Again, this is... Okay, these comments always bug me because it's like these people have way too much time on their hands.
Well, it's like, you and I have talked about this, like, you and I don't leave reviews for anything, let alone something we've never done before.
Right, and so it's like, you have that much time on your hands to leave a review of something you've never even done?
I don't understand.
Did they even, like, go to Cedar Point?
I don't know. Who knows? I assume it's a good coaster.
Why would you go to Cedar Point if you don't ride coasters?
I don't know. Here's another 3-star. Coaster is too rough and too many twisties for me. I like that. Too many twisties for me. And then last one here. 4 stars. Ride this one in the front. That is all. Bye. Have fun.
Thanks for the advice. I appreciate it.
That is all. Bye. Have fun.
So
there's our customer reviews. Let's talk about the history of GateKeeper. So let's hop into our time machine. Ready? Let's go back to 1985. All right, 1985. So we're pretty much going to be in Cedar Point the whole time. Sometimes we jump around a lot, but we're pretty much going to stay in Cedar Point today. So during the summer of 1985, Cedar Point opened a brand new roller coaster on the beach, so kind of over on the east side of the park. And this coaster would be Avalanche Run. So this was a bobsled coaster, kind of like a Reptilian that we did at King's Dominion this past year.
One.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. The biggest difference is this was built by Intamin, where Reptilian was built by Mock Rides. And the Intamin bobsleds featured single cars rather than a full train. Mm-hmm. So kind of different in that aspect of it. But they had been building some at Six Flags Parks in 1984. I think it was 1984. But I know Cedar Point basically saw these bobsleds come to Six Flags, and they're like, yeah, we're not going to be outdone by Six Flags. And so they built one of their own. And we've talked about this.
Part of the coaster wars that you always talk about?
I mean, not quite, because 1989 is kind of where the coaster war started, where it was kind of like, we need to be the biggest and tallest and fastest. But, I mean, you do see, especially throughout the 70s and 80s, where you would see one park chain would do, like, open a roller coaster, and then another park chain just has to get to be a little bit better. Especially that's kind of Cedar Point's thing, because like even when GateKeeper opened, they built GateKeeper bigger and taller and faster than the other wing coasters. So that's just kind of a Cedar Point thing of like, oh well, ours needs to be the best version of whatever coaster they were building. So let's see. Here's an ad for the ride here. We've talked about how the parks were just so aggressive with one another in their advertising, especially against Disney. Look at the bottom of the ad here. It says, "It's a thrill you won't find at Disneyland or Disney World. It's at Cedar Point." And for those of you that don't know, Haley will defend Disney World all day long. So
rude.
Every time they think they're better than Disney, Haley will just roll her eyes. We'll hear her roll her eyes through the microphone.
You can hear it.
Speaking of, let's watch a commercial where they did the exact same thing.
Digging at my Disney.
Here we go.
Do I have to watch this? We're gonna dig at Disney again. I don't want to watch this.
Oh, you're missing it. I gotta start it over now.
Disneyland doesn't have anything like it. They don't even have one at Disney World. It's called Avalanche Run, and it's new this summer only at Cedar Point. Avalanche Run. It's an Olympic bobsled on wheels. Try it this summer at Cedar Point, the amusement park.
So there you go. There's your Avalanche Run commercial. All right, so got this article here from newspaper Ohio area. I don't know exactly where it was, but this is One of the things that's interesting to read about coasters that were, 40, 50 years ago is just how, for that time, for that day and age, like, it was so intense and crazy. And nowadays you're like, oh, that's a family coaster. Like, so just this description of this guy, he describes his experience riding. The tension began to build as soon as I stepped into the 10-person bobsled and pulled the padded lap bar restraint in place. As the sled began its steady ascent to the drop-off point 63 feet up. 63 feet. I shared nervous smiles with other riders and tightened my grip on the bar.
Don't smile at me. I'm sorry, but that's just creepy. Don't smile at people.
It's just nervous smiles, though. It's just like...
Yeah, that's so creepy.
Nathan,
what if someone smiled at you? Let's think about this for a minute.
I don't know.
Some stranger would smile at you like this.
I don't know. I'm not looking at them. I'm looking elsewhere, so I wouldn't even see it.
That would freak me out.
Almost before I could suck in one last deep breath, I was off on the most exciting 1 minute 40-second ride I had ever taken. Guided only by gravity and its own momentum, the sled, tilting from side to side, rocketed at speeds nearing 40 miles per hour through 45-degree banked curves. It was all I could do to hang on. Mercifully, before my arms gave out, the sled entered the first of 4 brake stations. The brakes slowed the sled and allow riders to catch their breath before it takes off again through more twisting turns.
Mercifully,
Whoa.
my arms gave out.
Before my arms gave out. So, cost of $3.4 million. Here's some...
This guy's really trying to sell it, apparently.
Here's some pictures of the ride. I mean, it looks really nice on the beach there with the white and the blue, so...
Which kind of looks like GateKeeper.
It's kind of the same colors, yeah. Kind of interesting, so... And as you can see in the pictures here, like, it was a pretty popular ride. There was a lot of people in line in this picture, so... It
even goes farther back.
Yeah, it goes like back here too. Yeah. So it seemed like it was a pretty successful ride. Unfortunately, they discovered an issue with the ride pretty shortly after it opened. So one of the things they didn't really account for, because being a bobsled coaster, it's like a half
curved
pipe. It's like a half
shape,
pipe instead of just like normal steel track.
It's open.
Well, yeah. So sand would collect inside the track.
That's
like,
wild. Okay, you can even see
yeah, you
it
can
in the
actually you can see it
pictures.
like right in here. That like the wind would blow up the sand off the beach and it would just end up inside the track, and so they would have to close the ride.
I even feel like on like windy days, like sand would like hit your face.
Probably, yeah. But they would have to close the ride so that they could sweep the sand out of the track.
Wouldn't want that job.
I know, like, I think, because, like, you'd have, like, these stairs that you can go up on the brake run.
Stairs I see, too.
I mean, there's stairs up the lift hill as well, but then, like, you'd have to, like, walk through the track to sweep it out. Like, that just seems extremely precarious, so...
no, thank you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want that job.
It's quite the task. So, despite this, the ride continues to operate throughout the late 80s and was, fairly popular. Around the same time, Cedar Fair would get a new CEO. His name was Dick Kinzel. And he really would help push the envelope as far as, like, building the biggest and most thrilling coasters at Cedar Point. Like, that's he started them on that trajectory. So... That would include in 1989 when they would open Magnum XL 200, which was the beginning of the coaster wars. It was the first 200-foot coaster, et cetera, et cetera. And so during that time frame, Avalanche Run kind of became less and less popular as these bigger and better coasters are opening. And all the while, they're still having this issue of having to sweep out the sand out of the track, and so. At that point, they kind of were deciding like what's next for Avalanche Run. And so in 1989, that same year that Magnum XL 200 opened, a park you may be familiar with, Disney's MGM Studios.
Are you hating on my Disney again?
No, I said a park you might be familiar with. I said nothing bad about it. I just said Disney's MGM Studios.
Just saying.
My gosh.
Better be good.
So hostile. Cedar Point said one bad thing at the beginning of the episode. I have said nothing since.
Not the first time.
Oh, my. So Disney's MGM Studios opens in 1989. And one of the... it wasn't an opening day attraction, but it would open later that year, was Star Tours, which was basically a copy of the ride in Disneyland, which opened in 1987. So... at that point, Dick Kinzel, the CEO at Cedar Fair, was kind of taking an interest in the futuristic rides at Disney properties, particularly both of the Space Mountains and both of the Star Tours rides. And so this is kind of going on in his head at the same time that they're trying to decide what to do about Avalanche Run. And so they had an idea, well, what if we could turn Avalanche Run into our own quote-unquote Space Mountain?
Okay.
So in 1989 for 1990, Cedar Point announced that they would be converting disaster transport, or converting Avalanche Run into disaster transport. So it would be an indoor coaster. They basically, we'll talk more about kind of what they did, but here's just a brief description from the newspaper article here. A scream in space, Cedar Point has announced capital expenditures totaling more than $9.5 million in 1990, including disaster transport, an enclosed family attraction. Using the existing Avalanche Run structure, disaster transport will have a space adventure theme and will incorporate $1 million in lasers, wind blasts, mists, audio and video recordings, and over 150 props to create a high-tech ride experience. Okay.
Right.
So it sounds interesting. Sounds like, they're trying to do kind of what Disney's doing. It's kind of funny. In 1985, they were comparing Avalanche Run and saying, like, Disney has nothing like it. And now in 1990, they're like, how can we make this more like Disney? It's funny how that kind of came full circle.
It's true. Gotta learn their lessons.
A couple other things here. Here's a quote from... So rude.
It's not rude. It's true.
I will allow it because you speak for the GP and not the coaster
That's
enthusiasts.
Right. That's right. I said what I want. I'm supposed to make this interesting, right?
Yes, that is true.
Thank you.
Here's a quote from the CEO, Kinzel. He says, this will be a new brand of attraction for Cedar Point with $3.3 million in the project, including $1 million in special effects. It will have the best elements of any high-tech science fiction movie, but involve more of the senses because it's a ride experience as well. So, okay, makes sense. Here's another article here. This is an interview with his name's Eric Gordon. He was the senior production designer for the ride. He says, it's a theater for the mind and the body. The theater is composed of 6 different buildings attached together to form a massive superstructure. So essentially what they did, rather than building one giant building to put the whole roller coaster in, is they built 6 different buildings to put, and then they would attach it kind of with that. I'll show you a picture in a second here, but they built like 6 different buildings, and then those buildings were attached by, sections of coaster track.
Got it.
So they kind of did that. I think it says here actually. This was done so that audio chambers could separate the sound experiences during parts of the ride. So that way,
it's smart.
Yeah, it makes sense. So especially if you don't have, like at this point, onboard audio wasn't really a thing for roller coasters, and so you had to have the speakers along the track.
Right.
So it was kind of easier to do it this way. So, I think that's all I got from this article. So, okay, so it sounds good. Oh, I guess there's one more thing here. This also is the first time that ride host and hostesses will be costumed to complement the theme of the attraction. So that wasn't really a thing. Cedar Point just had the same uniforms for all the ride operators, but this time they actually had a costume to kind of try to immerse you.
Where did they get that from?
Well, obviously.
Just saying. They know what they're doing.
Oh, I understand that. Yes.
It's like the hidden...
I don't know why you're attacking me. I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying.
I'm attacking...
If we want Cedar Point to ever follow us...
Okay. Cedar Point, good job on following Disney. You did good.
So construction would begin shortly thereafter, after this announcement takes place. And on May 5th, 1990, Disaster Transport would open to the public. So here's some pictures of the ride. You can kind of see here in this image, this is kind of how they attached those different buildings together with like sections of track that they basically just covered the top of the track and made it just like a big, almost like a water slide, right?
It doesn't look like a coaster, though.
Well, I mean, wait, like from the outside, like the building and all that?
Inside, it just doesn't look like a coaster to me.
Well, just because, I mean, it's a bobsled coaster, so it looks kind of different in that sense. So
I guess.
I mean, if you just kind of have to imagine, what if they did this to Reptilian? What if they put Reptilian indoors? That's kind of exactly what this would look like.
Okay.
So, but I do have to ask you, what is this?
It's ugly.
It's ugly.
I'm more interested in the Dippin' Dot machine in front of the...
What does this look like to you?
It looks like a warehouse.
It does. It looks like a warehouse very much
like
so. We'll get into that.
A warehouse with that looks like air vents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't look
like if you were looking at the back, you might be able to tell it was a ride of some kind, but certainly on the front, it does not look like a ride. It just looks like a storage building. A couple pictures here from the inside with the lights on. I think I've got a commercial here as well for Disaster Transport.
Next time you get bored with life on Earth.
Okay.
Disaster Transport. This summer.
The dog is like, what the flip just happened, man? I'm out of here, boy.
The first time I watched that, I literally laughed out loud because it just caught me so off guard. If you want to watch these commercials that we're talking about, be sure to. I'll post links for them in over on social media, on the Twitter and the Instagram, so that you can kind of see these.
On the Twitter.
Yes, these are old theme park commercials are just hilarious to me. They're great.
They're so funny.
The only thing so early on, it was kind of confusing what the actual story of the ride is. So I've got two articles here that are describing the story of the ride, and they sound like two completely different rides. So here's the first one here. Riders were Dispatch Master Transport's first public passengers, and they were bound for a receiving station in Alaska. The alleged company had exclusively transported cargo until that time. The Rider shuttle would also be carrying cargo that included a highly volatile fuel nicknamed Really Big Bang. Okay. Then here's the other one. Blast off into the future with an exciting voyage into the unknown. This summer, Cedar Point has a new ride that's out of this world, Disaster Transport. The darkness of space will swallow you as your ship launches into a futuristic adventure where surprises lurk every moment. Surprises like alien satellites waiting to smash your spaceship with a blast of their powerful lasers. Vicious space pirates planning an attack to steal your cargo. Enormous asteroids on a collision course threatening to pulverize your ship.
That doesn't sound anything like the
No,
last
like the second one is way more aggressive for sure. And spoiler alert, there is no space pirates on this ride, so I don't know what is happening with this.
You want to put space pirates
I don't know if maybe this was an early description of the ride and then this was later, or I don't know. It's very strange. It's like two different people were trying to build two different rides and they just had to find the middle ground somehow.
Here, Bob and Jim, you guys write some articles.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was kind of strange. So initially, reception to the ride was fairly good. Again, the ride story was kind of hard to understand. Like, you got the general gist. This one is definitely closer to what most people would agree. Essentially, you were tasked you were riding with Dispatch Master Transport, which up until that point had just done cargo, and this would be the first time that they were transporting passengers. But then you get, as you're going through, you do have to avoid obstacles. Like the asteroid thing that this one mentions, that was a thing. There was an asteroid that you had to nearly avoid. You saw another spaceship that looked like yours exploding at some point. So this kind of seemed like what it was. And then the Alaska thing is true because as you finish the ride and pull into the station, the ride op that was like helping people get off the ride would say, "Welcome to Alaska."
That's
so
random.
I guess it was just kind of a comedic relief type of thing of like, oh, we went on this big space adventure and then just ended up in Alaska. So
Alaska, huh?
Yeah. So
of all the places.
Yeah, I don't know why Alaska, but yeah, the ride was fairly, received fairly well. It was kind of quirky and jumbled, but it was an enjoyable family ride and escape from the sun in the summer. So, unfortunately, pretty much within a year or two, like the ride it doesn't last long. We'll put it at that point. The park had paid millions to theme the ride, but there seemed to be like little, if any, money spent on upkeeping the ride. Which I don't know if they just didn't really consider that would be a part of the cost of a ride. Mm-hmm. Like a highly themed ride requires more upkeep.
Yeah.
But over the years, the projections and the audio cues, some of the animatronics and the lighting, there's like a launch effect at the top of the lift hill. Like all those would just kind of fall into disrepair and just would never be fixed.
What?
And at some point, the pre-show was even discontinued. So like...
What's the point of the ride, then?
I know, right? Like, the theming just kind of was left in the dust. And I have this quote here from Theme Park Tourist. They had a really great article about the history of disaster transport. So kudos to them for some of the info I got from their article. Be sure to go check them out. Here's a quote from their article. It says, "To be clear, disaster transport lived up to its name. It was a disaster. What remained of the ride's theming by the 21st century was laughable, and there appeared to be absolutely no attempt to do so much as replace a light bulb."
Oh dear.
As cobwebs gathered in the ride's pre-show, music, lighting, and props disappeared one by one. Cedar Point inherited a laughingstock ride that categorically failed at everything it had set out to do. The cost and upkeep required for even simple special effects, fog, theatrical lighting, and simple animatronics had been too much for the thrill park to commit to, and the half-baked ride left behind was an embarrassment. Wow.
Roasted.
Yeah. Without the theming, the storyline basically became non-existent. And especially at some point during 2000, like somewhere around 2000, they actually took part of the queue and converted it into a haunted house for their Halloween's event. So, like...
It's so bad, we're going to make it haunted.
Yeah, like... So, it just... I don't know. I don't know why it was the way it was. I mean, so... I guess we'll move on to this to kind of prove the point. So, during that same time frame, Kinsel became famous for being a penny pincher during his tenure at Cedar Fair. And one of the things that was most famous was... the 3D glasses that you could buy in the queue for disaster transport. So they were $1. And first of all, buying something for a ride in the queue is hilarious. It's something I've never heard of before. But here's the sign that was outside the little booth there.
Can you imagine getting on Ratatouille and you have to buy your glasses?
It's not quite that bad because they weren't a requirement to go on disaster transport, but that would be the ultimate penny pinching move for Disney to pull that off. Funny. Oh, people would throw hands over that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of another.
Or it's tough to be a bug, right? Uses the 3D glasses. Can you imagine trying to watch that without 3D glasses?
Give me a headache.
Yeah.
Or Muppet Vision.
Muppet Vision, yeah, exactly. Or doesn't a Flight of Passage use 3D glasses?
They do.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, I would be mad over that one. That's my ride.
So this sign outside the booth where they sold the glasses said, "3D glasses are made available to our guests for an opportunity to experience disaster transport with an enhanced theme and color palette." Ooh. What does that even mean?
Red and blue from the glasses.
I guess so.
That's your color palette.
Like those the glasses that would be in those old, when you got a magazine as a kid and the back page would be just glasses that you would punch out and then it's just made out of paper and two a red and a blue plastic film. Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. They don't even look at these. They don't even look. They look like paper.
I think they are.
I don't. This is very strange.
I mean, I guess there's your souvenir.
And
guys.
if that wasn't enough, there's more problems.
Oh, dear.
The building was air conditioned, but sometimes it didn't work. So riding a hot, muggy roller coaster indoors does not sound fun.
It doesn't sound fun.
Also, it couldn't run in the rain because the roof was susceptible to leaks. This is an...
So
this is an indoor...
sand.
First it's the sand, now it's the rain.
Now it's the rain.
This is an indoor coaster that can't run in the rain. This is a disaster. I guess from what I read, like, people... Because, like, if you think about it, it starts raining, and if you're over... some of the other coasters have to close in the rain. So you're like, oh, well, let's go ride disaster transport. And then get there and that's closed too. Like, that would be so frustrating.
Yeah.
And then it's probably closed longer than the other attractions because it stops raining and then they have to, the water would pool inside the track and they'd have to sweep it out.
That'd be so
What
annoying.
a nightmare. Oh my gosh. And then last but not least, the one thing you mentioned, which was mentioned by a lot of people, was the building was just ugly.
It's an
and
ugly
especially
building.
because they put it right on the beach. And so, like, this beachfront property that Cedar Point has is just completely blocked by this massive warehouse-looking ride. So, all in all, this thing is just... just horrible.
It needs to go.
Tear
it out.
It's just a terrible idea. Well, I wouldn't say it's a terrible idea. It was just executed poorly.
Yeah.
Very, very poorly. So this comes into play because throughout the rest of the 1990s and even, into the 2000s, I would say probably up till 2010, Cedar Fair was just terrified of doing any themed attractions. Like, if you look at Cedar Point's lineup, they don't have any dark rides. No dark rides. Like, I was thinking, when I read that, I was thinking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, that is true. Cedar Point, no dark rides.
That's true.
No dark rides at Cedar Point.
Yeah, because I was going to say Cedar Fair, Kingston.
Cedar Fair, there's some. And the reason for that is because they bought those parks. And so in 2006, when Cedar Fair bought the Paramount parks, Kings Dominion, Kings Island, Carowinds, etc., because they were Paramount, they were very heavily themed because they were using all of their what's the word I'm looking for? All of their properties. And so, you'd have Top Gun and Scooby-Doo and Tomb Raider and Italian Job. Like, you had all these different Paramount properties that were being used to theme all the different rides. I mean, the whole idea of the Paramount parks was to do what Disney does for its properties. It's to be another marketing tactic, essentially. But when Cedar Fair bought all the parks, rather than retheme the rides, they kind of just stripped them down. Right. Like, there's... I don't know, like the Scooby-Doo rides became Boo Blasters, which are super generic, and I don't know, it just, and you can look, like, that's why there's dark rides at those parks, but not at Cedar Point, because Cedar Fair was just like, we can't do dark rides. The exception to that is Knott's Berry Farm, but that's because the Knott family said, like, no, you're not touching our, like,
goodness.
Yeah, they basically said, we are selling you the park, but we get to pick what stays and what goes.
That's
and
smart.
It was very smart, and I'm glad they did it that way, because nowadays Cedar Fair respects that park and treats it as such. The Knott family really doesn't do a lot with the park nowadays, but Cedar Fair still treats it with the respect that it deserves. Right. Which is good, because it deserves it. But all the other parks were just kind of super generic until recently, and that's because in 2012... Dick Kinzel would leave Cedar Fair. He, pretty unceremoniously too, he was not very liked at that point. Tried to sell Cedar Fair at the very end of his tenure, and it just flopped. It didn't go anywhere.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that he...
Tried to sell everything off. I don't even remember who to. But, so after he left, Matt Ouimet would take over as CEO, and he was a former president of Disneyland. Hey. So we go from somebody that's terrified of theming to someone that knows theming like the back of their hand. Does. So from 2012 on, you can look at how theming changed in the Cedar Fair chain, and you can see like Banshee and Mystic Timbers and, things like that would come in where they were roller coasters that had a story and a high, very highly themed, especially Mystic Timbers. But then Intimidator 305 doesn't have like a story, but it has a great theme and a good, like the area around it is highly themed. So I think that was a little bit before WeMet came in, but so they kind of were getting to a point that they're like, maybe we can get into theming again. But WeMet has definitely, he's not the CEO anymore, but during his tenure really helped push Cedar Fair back into being willing to do theming. And you can see that with King's Dominion opening Jungle Expedition a few years ago.
Which is really well themed.
And then this year, Kings Island is opening Adventure Port, and Knott's Berry Farm is opening Fiesta Village. And tomorrow, actually, today's media day, but tomorrow Aeronautica Landing opens at Carowinds for their 50th anniversary. So really, you're seeing Cedar Fair being finally getting to this point where, like, okay, we can actually do this. Like, we can have themed attractions again, and it's been really good for the chain, I think. So, but what about disaster transport? Well, after WeMet took over in 2012, basically the first thing he said is, "What is this ugly warehouse-looking ride on my beachfront property at Cedar Point?"
Smackdown.
And so one of the very first things they did was like, what can we do with that beachfront property? How can we make that, like, if you have a beach, you got to take advantage of that, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of their whole thing. So before WeMet took over in November of 2011, the Cedar Point officials were at the IAAPA show kind of looking for ideas for their next big coaster. And they ran into B&M, who they had worked with previously on Mantis / Rougarou and with Raptor. So they had done work with B&M, were pleased with their work. And at that point, B&M was debuting a brand new roller coaster model, which was their wing coaster. So that would open, they opened 2 of them in 2012, which was Wild Eagle at Dollywood and X-Flight at Six Flags Great America. And so B&M pitched this model to Cedar Point and said, like, we think we can do something really awesome with this brand new model that we have. So by June of the next year, 2012, there were rumors circulating about a big wing coaster coming to Cedar Point, and the park executives wouldn't confirm anything, but basically said, like, an official announcement will be made at a later date. So by July 13th, 2012, Cedar Point announced that disaster transport would be dismantled. So here's the tweet that they sent out. It said, "Something big is happening. Disaster transport and space spiral," which was the observation tower that was right next to it. It says, "will be dismantled this season to make space for," and then just a bunch of symbols to kind of tease that something was coming, but they weren't going to announce it yet. So the crazy part is they announced that it would be closing in 2 weeks.
Huh.
So we've talked about how some parks will close things without warning, like Volcano the Blast Coaster at King's Dominion. And other parks, like Silver Dollar City, for example, announcing Fire in the Hole is going to be closing at the end of this year. So you have like a whole year to get your last rides in. So this definitely falls on the short side of that scale, but at least they gave it a little bit of a heads up. So what was cool, though, is as part of this, they actually held a Last Rider event that you could buy tickets and stay late at the park that night and get your last rides in. And then all the money was donated to charity, which is cool. I like when parks do that. So
yeah, I do too.
So here's some images from the Last Ride event. Disaster Transport Final Dispatch, a mission for the kids. So I'm not sure what the charity was that they donated to, but obviously it's for some children's charity. So that's cool. People they had this big sign that people could go and sign it with a marker with their name and any last words for disaster transport. They had shirts, and I think they even had an auction where they were selling props for the ride. So that's kind of cool. So
yeah,
I was
gonna say, like, if that happened to like Fire in the Hole, we would totally we would
that would not be good.
Our savings. Like, we wouldn't have savings anymore.
No, I wouldn't spend that much. But if they had like a little small thing that was like a couple $100, yeah, I would totally buy something like that to like put on my desk. I hope they do something like that, even if it's like a piece of wood. Yeah, like what they did with Wildcat, which they took like pieces of wood to sell. Yeah, I would be all over that for sure. So last rides were given on July 29th, 2012. Also, this is kind of a weird stat. The last ride was given at 11:53 p.m. with the lights turned on. So, okay. I don't know why we have that documented, but we do.
I guess.
So then within days after that, demolition started. And so here's some of the pictures as they dismantled that big, ugly, cream-colored warehouse on the beach.
Yeah, it's ugly.
It was, not great. So also, Space Spiral here, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of unrelated, but I found a video of the demolition they did for Space Spiral.
Yeah.
And rather than take it down piece by piece, like from the top, they actually detonated the foundation out from under it and tipped it over towards the beach.
Really?
And I have a video of it. This is pretty awesome. So here's the video of Space Spiral's demolition.
What?
So this thing, as it says in the video here, 330 feet tall. This thing is
Insane.
huge. This is
You
nuts.
see the thing move up too, like when it was going down, like what?
And then like some pictures here of kind of the aftermath. That is crazy.
I bet the cleanup too from that was crazy.
But I bet it was faster than trying to get a crane in there and take it down piece by piece.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating. A lot of parks don't really have that option.
No.
But I mean, they are like, we got all this room on the beach. Why don't we just send it that way? That's crazy.
What about the crabs?
I hope there weren't like any any birds or crabs on the beach. Like
the bird was sitting on the top and like
bird on the top would be fine, but like if the bird was like, I don't know, I hope they didn't smush anything. That's crazy.
They probably did. There's probably a couple big crabs under there.
So shortly after that, posters were scattered around the park with kind of hints to something else coming. Like the poster would say, like, how do you recover from a disaster? Like, and then finally, just about a month later, well, I guess a month after they announced it would be closing, and then 2 weeks after the final rides were given, Cedar Point announced GateKeeper, a 170-foot tall wing coaster manufactured by B&M. Coaster would also be built in conjunction with a brand new entrance to the park, hence the name, which was actually really good because from what I understand, the entrance to the park hadn't been updated since the 60s. So it was really outdated and
it needed a
refresh. Right. So, and they did a really good job with it. It looks great. So I also I got a commercial here for GateKeeper. Watching this is fascinating just to see how different a 1990 commercial is from a 2013 commercial. So
For 15 years, Cedar Point has held the title Best Amusement Park in the World. One reason? Record-breaking roller coasters like Top Thrill Dragster, Millennium Force, and others. Now, there's GateKeeper, the tallest, fastest, longest wing coaster. 170 feet tall, with over 4,000 feet of track flying right through 2 keyholes that don't look nearly big enough. Are you and your friends brave enough to ride the new record-breaking GateKeeper? Save on tickets at cedarpoint.com.
So there you go. Much more matter of fact than the old commercials.
Those old commercials are quite interesting.
Yeah, so here's a sign that was outside the ride, kind of giving details about the ride as it was being constructed.
That's your kind of sign.
I don't know. I like this because it kind of, for those of us that aren't, because like clearly if you're an enthusiast, you're like always watching for these announcements and you know. But like for the GP that's just walking by and being like, oh, what are they building over here? And then you see this sign, you're like, oh, we got to come back we got to come back next year and check that out. So it's pretty cool that they do that. Construction began shortly thereafter. Like I said, here's some construction pictures from GateKeeper. Something I noticed here, just like how much snow there is on the ground. It's something I don't really think about a lot, but Cedar Point,
so cold.
Well, yeah, and Cedar Point tries to do all of their construction during the off season, which obviously is the coldest part of the year for them. And kudos to the construction crews that brave the cold to build these roller coasters.
I wouldn't want that job.
No, I wouldn't either. And like I said, kudos to them because that's a tough job.
Really tough.
It's a tough job. So. There were nearly 100 workers from 4 engineering companies that participated in the project. The supports and track were filled with sand. That's pretty common if you're trying to make the roller coaster quieter. So like the other B&M coasters like Rougarou and Raptor, they did not fill with sand. But I guess with GateKeeper, they wanted to keep the beach and the front entrance to the park quiet, like relatively quiet, which I think was a smart decision because, one, when you're on the beach, you don't want this insanely
really
loud roller
right.
coaster. And then, two, at the front of the park, you've got like guest services and things like that you need to be able to hear the people talking. So, like,
right.
makes sense. I think that was a smart decision to do it that way. So, after 8 months of construction and a month of testing, GateKeeper would open to the public on May 11th, 2013, and continues to operate to this day. Here's some pictures from opening day. A lot of people that were attending, even though it was kind of a gross day. You can see it was all gray and cloudy.
You would still be one of those people.
Oh, certainly. So they're throwing out T-shirts to people waiting in line. And then, of course, Snoopy was there to cut the ribbon. So
Oh, good old Snoopy.
The ride experience is as follows. After leaving the station, the train turns 180 degrees to the right and begins the climb up the lift hill. At the top of the lift, it immediately enters the first element, an inversion that B&M calls the wing overdrop. The train rotates 180 degrees before descending 164 feet in a half loop, hitting the top speed of 67 miles an hour. After the first drop, the train enters an Immelman loop situated under the lift hill. And after the loop, the train turns right into a camelback hill, followed by an oversized corkscrew. This is immediately followed by the two keyhole elements that are in the 100-foot tall towers over the park's entrance. They're connected by a zero-G roll inversion. The train dips low to the ground and enters an inclined dive loop where the track reaches its turnaround point. The train then goes in an inline twist back over the gate to the park. The track veers to the left and hits the mid-course brakes, then followed by another hill that dips to the ground and into the 360-degree downward helix, followed by a small hill up to the left into the final brake run. So coaster was an immediate success with the public. And, GP and enthusiasts alike were pretty happy with how it turned out.
Right.
And honestly, it was perfect for what they needed to do. Like, the whole goal with the project was to do basically three things. One, they wanted to develop a beachfront property. And certainly this coaster looks a lot better on the beach than Disaster Transport ever could. So I think that's great. You also get a great view of the beach as you're going up the lift hill. Like, it's very picturesque over there, riding GateKeeper.
Yeah, I remember that just being a really, really pretty view.
Mm-hmm, certainly. So the second goal was to revamp the entrance to the park, which, again, they did a great job of making everything more modern. And honestly, it's a great, if you're going to call yourself the roller coaster capital of the world, like, having a roller coaster directly over the entrance to the park it's brilliant. It's well done. So
smart
very
decision.
Cool. Very cool. And then the last thing was, like, anytime a park opens a coaster, you want to have high capacity. And these 32 passenger B&M roller coasters are perfect for just cranking people through. And that's exactly what GateKeeper does. And typically GateKeeper will have one of the longest lines in the park, just because it's right at the front. And we've talked about this before. Like, the position of a coaster within the geography of a park makes a difference in how long the line is. Like, Dominator always has a long line at King's Dominion, even though it's not one of the best. Like, it's not even top two in the park, but it'll have a line longer than Twisted Timbers or Intimidator 305 because people just walk in and they're like, oh, look at that. We got to go ride that one. So GateKeeper is kind of the same story. So, but yeah, so it is perfect for all the different things the park needed out of the ride. So in the aftermath, the coaster would finish third in the Golden Ticket Awards for Best New Coaster of 2013. It would finish behind Iron Rattler from Six Flags Fiesta Texas, and our very own Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City would take home the Golden Ticket Award for Best New Coaster of 2013. Parts of Disaster Transport can still be seen. There were parts that were sent to the National Roller Coaster Museum. This is, they refurbished it to look good, like repaint and all that. So they've got a section of track and also one of the trains there. And I think the entrance to the ride, like the sign that was above the entrance to the ride, also got sent to the Roller Coaster Museum. So whenever the National Roller Coaster Museum opens, there will be a really nice exhibit for Disaster Transport.
Whenever it opens.
Whenever it opens, who knows when that's going to be, but hopefully soon. But even if that, doesn't open for a while, if you go to Cedar Point during Halloween Weekend's event, you should be able, and I can't confirm this because I haven't seen it myself, but I've seen pictures. You should be able to find an old car from Disaster Transport out in one of the in a patch of grass.
So, because we were there pretty late in September.
Oh no, it was early September. We saw them setting up, literally because we were there for 3 days. We would get to
some stuff.
We did see some stuff. We would go to the park the next day and we would see the stuff that they put out overnight.
There was a train that I saw at one point, and I'm curious if it was this one.
Maybe.
Because
I don't remember seeing it, but I don't remember seeing it, but maybe I just wasn't looking. I don't know.
You were looking at the coasters.
But regardless, you should be able to find a train or a car from Disaster Transport with skeletons in it, wearing gear, like warm winter gear, and a sign next to it that says, "Welcome to Alaska." And then there's also, they put a graveyard out at Cedar Point during Halloween weekends. It has the names of all the old attractions from the park. So here's the one for Disaster Transport. It says, "When bobsleds seemed too slow of pace, we launched them into outer space. With a dim robotic staff, including Dave," I think Dave was one of the animatronics on the ride, "disaster's riders had to be brave. One question remains, so I'll come out and ask you, did anyone ever actually arrive in Alaska?" So, that's pretty funny. Corny, but funny. So let's see.
I know, I didn't arrive in Alaska.
What? You didn't ride Disaster Transport. That's why you didn't end up in Alaska.
Okay.
Now, one of the interesting things about Disaster Transport, which I can kind of relate to, is despite how problematic and, for lack of a better word, disastrous it was, it still missed quite a bit. The best way that I can describe it is, so Fire in the Hole, I know it's outdated. I know it's weird. The story is strange. It's not that thrilling. And yet I'm going to miss it so much because I've just grown up riding Fire in the Hole my whole life. And I think
when I went on it for the first time.
Oh yeah,
time,
you went on you were in your mid-20s when you rode the first time. You're like, what is this?
It's still so strange to me. The surprise.
Yeah, so I feel like it's kind of the same for Disaster Transport. Some people just have a nostalgia for the ride. Maybe, they were 6 years old when it was built and it was their first big kid coaster. So, and then they just grew up riding it their whole lives until it was taken out. So because of that, if you go to Cedar Point's shop, you can actually find Disaster Transport merchandise. So here's a Disaster Transport poster on there. And there's a big old $80 canvas for Disaster Transport with some blueprints and stuff on there that you can get. And even if you go just on Google and type in Disaster Transport, you can find tons of stuff.
Merch. It's so funny.
Whether it's on Redbubble or TeePublic or Etsy, you can just find tons of Disaster Transport stuff that people these 12E shirts that are on Redbubble. There's just tons of stuff. And if you look around when you're at Cedar Point, chances are you'll see somebody that's wearing a Disaster Transport shirt. It's just kind of, despite how problematic it was, it still has that nostalgia for a lot of people that grew up going to Cedar Point. So, so that's Disaster Transport. Last thing about GateKeeper before we wrap up, the new boardwalk section that's coming to Cedar Point is kind of
it's going to be so
cool.
It's
kind of the epitome of everything we've been talking about in this episode. Because one, it's showing Cedar Point being willing to go back into doing theming, which, yes, this isn't as heavily themed as Adventure Port or Fiesta Village or whatever, but it's themed to what they're trying to, it's themed to a boardwalk, which is perfect for a beachfront property park.
Yeah.
So the idea is to bring this theming back to this area, which is so ironic for a part of the park that had a ride that scared them away from theming in the first place. So it's just kind of interesting to see that come full circle. And you can see GateKeeper in this artist rendition, because I think GateKeeper will be considered part of this boardwalk section of the park. So just because, I mean, the entrance to the ride is right here.
Right.
And all the new stuff is right next to it. So.
Right, because here's that's like where the games are.
Yeah, because you see the games here. Here's the, I can't remember.
Swing
I can't remember what this is
thing.
called. But then the Windseeker is there. So all of this in between GateKeeper and the Windseeker is where the new part
I thought
is.
they had the Matterhorn. Are they moving it?
Yeah, the Matterhorn is actually, it's down here on the midway nowadays, and they're moving it over to this new section. So I think there's 2 rides. I think this ride is also like over here somewhere, and they're moving it into there. So
Interesting. Okay.
fun story. And we may talk about it someday. Hopefully, we'll go back to Cedar Point and we'll be able to ride Wild Mouse. But there actually used to be a roller coaster right here. Where the new boardwalk is. So we'll hopefully talk about that someday. But it's not directly related to the history of GateKeeper, so we'll leave that for another time. But
All right.
But that is the history of GateKeeper
Good
and
job.
the first episode of season 2 in
Yay.
the books. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're excited to be back. We hopefully got a lot more fun stories to tell. I've been sitting on this one ever since last year just because I knew that GateKeeper had a kind of a fascinating history with the coaster that came before it. But so I was excited to tell this one. It was a fun story. So be sure to go and give us a follow on social media if you haven't. Like I said, we're on Twitter and Instagram at Airtime Traveler. You can see all the images and the videos that I showed Haley as we were going through the history of GateKeeper today. And also, you'll just be able to keep up on any other things we've got going on. As we go throughout the year and we visit these parks, we'll do trip reports throughout the year. And occasionally, if there's big coaster news, you may see an episode of Coaster Conversations drop. That's kind of just an episode we'll do to talk about what's going on in the industry or any announcements that may have happened. So we'll just do those occasionally. And those ones, it may just be me, may not be me and Haley. You'll just have to tune in and find out.
Wait and see.
So be sure to follow us on Spotify or wherever you're listening so that you can be updated whenever we release a new episode. And I think that's all we've got for today. Be sure to tune in a couple weeks for our very next episode. Not sure where we're going yet next time. We'll figure that out when we get there, I suppose.
All right.
Got any final thoughts?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.